We will fully defend Israel against Iran, including militarily. That's in writing in multiple forums that I've actually put out there. But I've also been clear, and I think it's important to be clear, that that doesn't mean putting boots on the ground, sending our men and women to die, as they did in places like Iraq.
Well, that's an
that
important
actually
distinction.
is worse for the United States and worse for Israel.
How do you see the magnitude of the Iranian nuclear threat and terror threat?
I think it's significant. And I think that you have an Ayatollah Khamenei who has been hostile not only to Israel's continued existence, which is of course a problem, but is also hostile to the United States of America, which is my job as the US president to look after as well. A lot of the long-range missile technologies they're working on, they don't need that to hit Israel. They need that to hit the United States.
Right.
And so I think this is a serious threat. And so I've been very consistent on this. I believe that we need to absolutely ensure that Iran never, ever becomes nuclear armed or anywhere close to it. Not because that's a vital interest for any other country than the United States of America, but it so happens that Israel also shares that national interest in common,
and
which is why
we
need to work together.
Yeah.
I mean, much of the Arab world, but I think that among reliable partners in the Arab world, let's get real, Israel is the partner in the Arab world that we can actually rely on rather than to stab us in the back. And so, I think that other Arab partners are also important, but they have other ties to China, to other countries. I think that can compromise, I think, their reliability as partners for the United States. But when it comes to the U.S.-Israel relationship, that is probably one of the most important shared objectives that we care about, that we can work together to ensure that Iran never, ever, ever becomes nuclear armed with a nuclear weapon.
Okay,
and I just think that's
so you're going to
obvious vital interest for
You're going to
country.
resonate with a lot of evangelical Christians as well as a lot of Americans on that.
Yeah.
But so how would you deal with it? Because as I've watched various interviews with you, including with Israel Hayom, Israel's biggest newspaper the other day, you actually took the military option completely off the table, the U.S. option.
Actually, that's not accurate. But I will tell you what I did take off the table. I took U.S. troops off the table. So one of the things that's, and Joel, I think you probably understand this about me, and I just think it's important people understand this about me, is I'm not a traditional politician.
That's true.
I don't play the political games reading from the binders handed on the talking points of how you're supposed to read. But the flip side of that is what I tell you, I think, is much more authentically my own conviction. I believe in clarity over ambiguity. And I think that does ruffle some feathers. It lends itself to opposition research misquoting you, but that's okay. That's the way I do things. I think that's actually going to make the U.S.-Israel relationship far stronger by the end of my first term than it has ever been, because I will treat it as a true friendship, not just some sort of transactional relationship. One of the things I love about Bibi is he's a straight talker. I'm sure he and I will get along. I'm sure I'm going to have him over to the White House in a way that Biden didn't, and I'm sure I'm going to go see him in Israel as well.
Good.
But that's the kind of relationship I want to have. Real, authentic.
Okay,
Actually, let's
so
have
let me
straight
clarify.
talk.
Let me just make sure you're clear, though.
Yeah, I'll be happy to clarify.
When you mean, I don't want to use men and women, like, you mean boots on the ground. You don't want to invade like Iraq, because what you left the
That's
impression.
Exactly right.
I watched on video and I read that transcript.
The headline left the impression, but
I watched the whole video of the interview, and you left me with the impression, someone who's, I'm not going to take a position on endorsing anybody, but that's positive towards you, that you wouldn't use force, and meaning airstrikes or whatever. That is the impression you left here in
that's definitely
Israel.
wrong.
Will you use military force to stop Iran?
We will not stop Israel from defending itself to the fullest capacity, and we remain supportive of Israel because they are our friend. I think it's really important that the U.S. not put our own men and women on the line in a war with Iran. This is an Ayatollah in Iran that would rather Israel not exist. Let's just call that truth out for what it is. And so Israel needs to be in a strong position to defend itself, and the United States will be at Israel's back. But I think that that's a very different thing from automatically sleepwalking ourselves into war. I'm an anti-war president, and the way I'm going to do it is by deterring war, be it ending the war in Ukraine, be it deterring China. These are important elements of why I think it's important to be strong, but in a way that doesn't accidentally walk us into wars that we don't belong in.
Okay,
that's
definitely. Why don't you clarify that?
And if that's a misimpression, then we should be absolutely
it's important
clear.
To make that
and you can look at what I've written. Absolutely. And you can look at what I've written in multiple forums as well, in writing, and it's consistent with this. I have said that we will fully defend Israel against Iran, including militarily. That's in writing in multiple forums that I've actually put out there. But I've also been clear, and I think it's important to be clear, that that doesn't mean putting boots on the ground, sending our men and women to die, as they did in places like Iraq.
Well, that's an
that
important
actually
distinction.
is worse for the United States and worse for Israel. And Joel, I think you understand this, and I think your audience understands this as well. Most people in Israel who are in favor of the U.S.-Israel relationship, most pro-Israeli advocates in the United States have long said, and I appreciate the honesty of it, that Americans should not have boots on the ground who put themselves in harm's way to fight a war for Israel. That's always been the tenor, because that allows us to be honest, to say we should go to the fullest extent of supporting Israel outside of that boundary.
There is, though, another statement that you're making that causes people to think, all right, he's really not willing, if we get to the last possible moment and nothing else will work, to stop Iran from getting the bomb. Because you're saying everywhere, the only war that I would set into motion is against the deep state, the administrative state, which, by the way, God bless you for that. But when you say that in the combination with maybe lack of clarity, the risk is, look, the United States with our technology and weaponry could do in, I don't know, days, weeks, maybe a month, far more damage to that nuclear program, right, than Israel. So
I've been very clear.
You sound like you're taking that off the table, and you've also mentioned.
No, I'm not.
Part of a broader
disengagement.
You talked about a broader disengagement strategy from the Middle East. So those are reasons why we're trying to get clarity on where you're really coming from.
Yeah, and I like long form settings, and I've been clear, and I'll continue to be clear about exactly where I am. These are great discussions, Joel. So I think the top objective in year one, as it relates to Middle Eastern policy, is to consummate Abraham Accords 2.0. I think that was one of the signature achievements of the Trump administration. I think one of the most anti-Semitic elements of Western foreign policy has been to hold Israel hostage over the Palestinian question, when in fact, that has held Israel back unnecessarily, integrating Israel back into the security and economic infrastructure. But in reality, those are the less important of the nations that are part of the pact right now. It was a great first step. We need to diplomatically lead and use levers to get Saudi Arabia and Oman and Qatar, and even outside the Middle East. Let's talk about Indonesia, getting them into that pact. That takes Israel and propels Israel forward to a new level. I want to take the Trump policies towards Israel, but carry them forward to the next level. And I think I'm going to be able to do that because I bring a new generation, an authentic voice, and a realist vision of foreign policy to actually accomplish that. I'm staying true to commitments that have always been woven in to the U.S.-Israel relationship, which is that we don't want U.S. boots on the ground for a variety of reasons. We don't need that.
So let's talk about the dust-up you had with Nikki Haley, but let's set aside hers or Pence's or anybody else in what they were saying. Because I did go back and watch all of the interviews, starting with a conversation you had in New Hampshire with a voter, later with Russell Brand. That was a very interesting and extended DVD version, as it were. But you did say several things, and I think you clarified, but I want you to do it on the show, okay? So you've used several phrases. One, that you hope to get to the point in 2028 where Israel doesn't need a dime or a shekel, we might say, of American military investment. That has rattled people. So I want you to talk about it. But
absolutely. Yeah, and this is a great conversation. So what I've said is, and this is one of the reasons I love Bibi, by the way, as a counterpart in Israel, is that we're never going to cut off aid. Just to state the obvious, let's just get the table stakes on there. And I've said this in countless forums too, Joel. We're not going to cut off our aid to Israel until Israel tells us that they are ready for it and that they actually are not only fine with it, that they're fully ready for it. We'll see when and if that day comes. I'm not going to cut off Israel in a vacuum.
What a fascinating conversation with Vivek Ramaswamy, third in most polls, but creeping up towards second in some national polls. You heard me ask him very direct questions on a number of critical issues: abortion, Israel, Iran, his general foreign policy view, and his talk about disengaging from the Middle East, which I'm not a fan of.
Take a look at this clip of Vivek talking with a voter in June in New Hampshire who asks him specifically if he will stop giving Israel aid should he become president.
I think that this would have to be part of a broader disengagement with the Middle East. So I would not do that as an isolated policy. I would do it as part of also making sure that we're not leaving other people we've also propped up, from Saudi Arabia to even Iran in other ways over the years, right? So it's got to be part of a comprehensive strategy. It has to be part of a broader comprehensive vision for disengagement. That I do support.
So here's the thing. There's a lot I like about Vivek Ramaswamy, his family's immigrant success story, his rejection of wokeism, his commitment to stop the invasion across the Mexican border, his declaration of war on the deep state, and his call for a 12% flat tax, to name a few. But here's what I don't like. In his heart, he really does want to end military aid to Israel. That's not fake news. That's what he told that voter in New Hampshire. You just saw it. Sure, he's backtracking now because it's a deeply unpopular position. And look, I'm glad he's listening to voters, but his core instincts were wrong. I also don't like that Vivek wants to develop what he calls a comprehensive strategy for disengagement from Israel and the Middle East. That's dangerous. And he's not being clear and decisive about how he'd stop Iran from getting the bomb, telling Israel Hayom he wouldn't use military force, then telling me that he would. That's another problem. What's more, while I appreciate that he's pro-life, I think he's completely wrong on opposing federal legislation to protect the unborn. And I'll just tell you right now, none of these things are going to play well with evangelical Christians. That said, I do give him credit for coming on the Rosenberg Report. And don't forget, this is only part one of our exclusive conversation, his longest and most detailed yet, on Israel, Iran, the Abraham Accords, and his broader vision of U.S. foreign policy.